It's Canonically Crumb, the only show that explores the comics and characters of the Crummy-verse. Alright, Crumb-Bums, you've been very patient with me, as I've talked about politics more or less for the last 3 episodes. And some of you were very upset about that. I think that's enough time for the haters and the losers. So today we're going to do a topic that's sure not to piss off anyone. Religion. It's Mr.Natural Part 3. Mr.Natural meets God. As always, we need to acknowledge that, for our purposes, our Crumb's canon includes the Yum Yum Book, the Complete Crumb, the Weirdo Years, Zap, Hop, Mystic Funnies, Tales of Paranoia, and a bit of Dirty Laundry. This is part 3 of our chronological exploration of Mr.Natural. A trinity of episodes, if you will, which is apropos for today's trio of comics. We left off last time with a couple of Mr.Natural strips from the East Village Other, published towards the end of 1967, at the dawn of the Happy Hippie Comics era. And that's where we're beginning today. Now, since I already said no politics, we'll gloss over Mr.Natural's offstage campaign against the Oscar Mayer Wiener Czar and the post office's Mr. Zip for the 1968 Republican primary race, as well as his next canonical appearance, which is also from the East Village Other, from February of 1968, titled Head Comics and Far Out Fun, subtitled Schumann the Human, a poignant psychological drama featuring Mr.Natural, which we're going to save for a future episode about Schumann. So we're trucking along to the next issue of The Other, or the next page of the Complete Crumb Volume 5 if you're following along at home, where we find Mr.Natural meets God. Another rcrumb laugh riot. This was published in black and white originally, which is how it appears in the Complete Crumb, but we'll be using the colorized version from the massive rcrumb coffee table art book, published by Kitchen Sink for Back Bay Books in 1997. Whew. I hope I never drop this on my toe. Our story opens at midnight, on an ominous black sedan speeding through the dark city streets. What does this have to do with Mr.Natural, who is just minding his own business, you might ask? Plenty, as it runs the venerable old mystic down with a splat. And that, Crumb-Bums, is how Mr.Natural died. Incidentally, the black sedan, the personification of death, returns later in the canon in a zine from 1975 called Stoned Picture Parade. In a 5-panel ad for Zap Comics, Mr.Natural soars through the air in Bermuda shorts and sunglasses, beverage in hand, in pursuit of the black sedan. It nearly gets away before Mr.Natural crashes through the roof, placing him square in the driver's seat, and consequently in control of his own destiny. Which is exactly where Zap Comics promises to put you, Crumb-Bums. But for now, immersed in an inky black void, Mr.Natural thinks to himself, didn't feel a thing. From out of frame he hears celestial music. Could it be? When he opens his eyes, he sees the classic image of an angel, complete with halo and wings, and blowing a golden trumpet. Oh yeah? He exclaims incredulously, laying on a cloud. She ushers him through the pearly gates, saying, "Hope you enjoy your stay," as looky-loo angels gather to peek around the walls Kilroy style, getting a good gawk at the new guy. These pearly gates feel somewhat off-model to me. You know, I tend to picture them in more of a gilded, ornate fashion, like in all the cartoons. Whereas Crumb's depiction is more reminiscent of this 18th century fresco by Johann Baptist Zimmermann. As the scene becomes even more cliché, Mr.Natural exclaims, "Angels? Singing hymns? The whole shtick!" This is too much. Next walks up the biggest celebrity of them all, who surprises the Natch, saying that he's been expecting him for some time. He introduces himself, and Mr.Natural replies, "Well, I'll be a son of a gun. So you're God." This is the first canonical appearance of the Crummy-verse character, God. Or at least God the Father, as we'll see later. I was actually planning on doing a future episode exploring the nature of God and the various manifestations of him or her or it or whatever in the Crummy-verse. But now I'm thinking maybe we should just get it over with all quickly like. I mean, how complicated could God be, right? Right? So, the God that Mr.Natural is meeting here. This is your iconic, popular depiction of God. You know, an old man in robes with a long flowing white beard. Very similar in appearance to Mr.Natural now that I think about it. And this is more or less the way that Crumb illustrated God in the non-canonical book of Genesis in 2009, which depicted all 50 chapters of the first book of the Old Testament of the Bible. A little more severe than the cartoon stereotype we see here, but in broad strokes, the character design is the same. Although sketchbook drawings from 2003 suggest that Crumb was exploring a beardless, almost alien design for God in Genesis, which I think would not have worked as well. Back in the 60s, towards the end of 68, we get a completely different rendition of God in Dirty Dog from Zap number 3. Here, a funny animal comic-style bunny rabbit, wearing a smart little jacket, tie, and pork pie hat combo, introduces himself cutely and acutely as God. He's operating a crane-mounted film camera marked that great cosmic TV network in the sky. This design is based, of all things, on a little plastic Easter Bunny toy that I'm pretty sure originally had a lollipop sticking out of the camera. I've encountered at least 2 different color variants of the toy over the years, neither of which match the color image of God on the cover of the Complete Crumb Volume 5. They're a neat bit of ephemera from a 1950s toy and candy company called Rosbro that was located in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, go Paw Sox, who were known for having manufactured these little plastic holiday-themed candy holders in the middle of the 20th century. Here's a couple of cute Halloween ones I found. Adorable. Oh, and lest you think that this version of God is exclusively the God of Animal Town, the funny animal exclusive sphere of the Crummy-verse, where we find Fritz, Fuzzy the Bunny, and those cute little bearsy-wearsies, and that the character who Mr.Natural meets in heaven is the god of the natural world, the sphere populated by mostly human characters like Flaky Foont, Asparagus, Exactly, and so on. Well, I'll wait while you put that embarrassingly uninformed opinion right out of your stupid pointy head. Is it gone yet? Because in 1997, we find the exact same depiction of God on the cover of Mystic Funnies number 1, looking down on Flaky and Mr.Natural as they walk through the park. But these aren't the only 2 depictions of God in the Crummy-verse. Oh no, Crumb-Bums. In fact, in 1974, in Zap number 7, we get Mr.Natural meets the Kid, a very powerful, big boy-esque entity who claims to be God, and who tests Mr.Natural's soul in the desert, putting him through his paces and seriously f***ing with his head. Here's the Kid, seen being worshipped by Flaky Foont, on this non-canonical unused cover for Zap number 7. And Foont is simply falling in line with the throngs of the Kid's followers, as seen canonically here in the same issue. What can I say? The Kid's a comer. Though personally, I've never been convinced that the Kid really was God. and I've long harbored suspicions that the kid was some kind of demon in disguise, like Pazuzu, who the Natch battled in 1976 in the pages of the Village Voice, shortly before being committed to a mental institution for over a decade by Flaky Foont and Ruth Schwartz. In sketchbooks, we often see God depicted as a cosmic eye with radiating light, and multiple times canonically as the Eye of Providence on top of a pyramid. We've seen the popular trope of God's hand coming down from the clouds in All Meet Funnies, on the cover of Weirdo number 19, and in Don't Tempt Fate from Mystic Funnies number 3, or as God's shoe on the cover of Weirdo number 4, as well as the lesser-known trope of God's dripping dangling from the clouds in Comical Comics in XYZ Comics in 1972. And of course there's God's most substantial cameo in Mystic Funnies number 2, where, as the viewer, we see his hand coming down from the sky and forcing little Moron to march to the abyss before instructing him to jump, but whose true appearance is so inconceivable to man that the Moron exploded into goo upon stupidly turning around and catching a glimpse of him. But we're getting a little off topic here. Returning to the comic at hand, God asks Mr.Natural what he thinks of heaven. Never one to flatter another's vanity, Mr.Natural gives his honest opinion. It's all a little corny, and he asks God if the whole concept isn't a little outdated. The man upstairs isn't too impressed with Mr.Natural's assessment, and the next thing he knows, Mr.Natural's exclaiming, "What I say, what I say," as an angel carrying him out by the scruff says, "Sorry, bub, boss's orders." And the comic, which is to be continued, ends with Mr.Natural getting the boot from heaven with the punchline, "So it's just not my scene. I can't help it." Veering from the canon for a moment, on a sketchbook page from 1967, we get an earlier version of Mr.Natural Meets God. It has some similarities with the canonical one we just read. However, instead of getting killed by the black sedan, Mr.Natural simply decides that his work here is over, and he sort of phases out of existence. He meets God in a similar manner, except instead of asking Mr.Natural's opinion of heaven, he asks him about life. The Natch treads a little lighter here with the big man, but ultimately stammers his way to admitting that it could have been better. God pushes back, reminding him that creation is perfect, and that God is, in fact, infallible, which makes you wonder why he would ask the question in the first place. But Mr.Natural stands his ground, saying that sometimes, maybe, life's a bit too much. God, unimpressed, walks away and splarks Mr.Natural back to Earth, who in return grabs a protest sign featuring the Nietzschean aphorism, "God is dead." In the following issue of the East Village Other / Page of the Complete Crumb Volume 5, we get Part 2, Mr.Natural Gets the Bum's Rush. Mr.Natural, having been booted out of heaven, walks down the street ranting, "Who wants to go to heaven anyway?" With a bam, he's immediately struck by a lightning bolt from the sky. Miffed and singed, Mr.Natural shakes his fist at the literal heavens, yelling, "Listen, Mr. High and Mighty, I'm not buying it." And he heads home griping, "Why doesn't he get off my back? He knows there's no hope for me." Later at home, sitting in his easy chair and reading a book called Applied Atheism, the doorbell rings. It's a messenger with a telegram. It reads, "Dear Mr. Natural, you are hereby condemned to hell as of this notice. Stop. Signed, God." The messenger removes his cap, revealing pointy ears and devil horns, saying, "Let's go, boss." Mr. Natural recognizes the devil, exclaiming, "You!" Now, the devil is possibly my favorite character in all of literature and art, but there's really never been a great depiction of him in the Crummy-verse. Okay, sure, there's Devil Girl, but while she definitely has some occult qualities, she's clearly not the devil. Then there's this non-canonical, horny girl devil on the cover of this Jomo book titled The Little Wonder Hot Book, the Masturbator's Favorite Home Companion, which is a small unpublished jam book drawn by Crumb and some of the Zap boys at S. Clay Wilson's apartment in 1969. Even censored, I can't show much of this book. She's costumed similar to another girl devil on a weirdo cover that we'll talk about more in depth in a couple of minutes. But I like this one because Crumb has included a drawing of himself being led into hell by his lust for her. Though I think my favorite depiction is on the cover of a different issue of Weirdo, number 24, which is marked for satanic worshipping adults only, and features Satan occulted in a dark soup of cross-hatching. You might even miss him on first glance. In his demonic mouth, if you squint, it reads,
"Come to me, my children,"
which is contrasted by the highly visible text, "The magazine that challenges superstitious beliefs." Published in 1988, at the height of the Satanic Panic, Crumb is clearly satirizing the widespread fear of Satanism at the time. And there are other examples of devils in Crumb's work, but they're all fairly superficial takes on the Dark Lord. Really, none of Crumb's devils are particularly interesting. I think maybe it's because the Crummy-verse is a kind of torturous and miserable hellscape unto itself, and so many of its denizens are just callously cruel and immoral, or they get victimized in callously cruel and immoral ways. Like, how are you going to have a character that's even more malicious and evil than most of the characters already in the canon? There's not much point to it. And it shows here as Satan is reduced to the role of mere messenger boy for God. Oh well. Mr.Natural protests, saying, "The unmitigated gall! He can't do this to me!" But the devil just says, "This way, chief." Making a break for it, Mr.Natural shouts, "I won't be shook that easily! So long, sucker!" Imagine them trying to get me into their medieval torture chamber. She. He muses as a large crack opens in the earth, which he falls into with a loud, "Oops!" This canonical comic is derived from 3 earlier non-canonical ones, which we find in the sketchbooks, again from a year earlier. Firstly, there's Mr.Natural versus the man upstairs, who relentlessly disturbs his peace by thumping and thudding on the ceiling. Outside, Flaky wonders what could have so badly upset Mr.Natural's usual calm and serene demeanor. He tells him that the man upstairs is mad at him for refusing to play his way. Just then, a literal cloud manifests just above Mr.Natural's head, revealing exactly who the man upstairs is. Down page, we get the follow-up. Mr.Natural battles the man upstairs, in which a familiar-looking messenger boy delivers a present to Mr.Natural, who asks, "Did the big boy send you around?" Upon opening the present, he gets it bam in the schnoz from a classic boxing glove on a spring. It ends with Mr.Natural shaking his fist at the man upstairs, cursing, "You're a real big-time operator." I think these man upstairs strips, with the lightning and the messenger boy and shaking his fist at God, inspired the third non-canonical strip, an earlier version of Mr.Natural Goes to Hell, which appears shortly after in the sketchbooks, and which is so similar to the later canonical version that we just read, that there's no point in saying much more about it except that it exists. So this all brings us to the third part of our comic trilogy for the day, which completes the cycle with Mr.Natural Repents. It opens with a summation of the comic. The hot-headed old sage learns that he can't mess around with the man upstairs without paying his dues. And indeed we find the Natch begging for his very soul, shouting, "I'll be good, I'll be good!" God responds by taking pity on Mr.Natural, who in turn breathes a sigh of relief, praising the Lord from whom all blessings flow. Unfortunately, this robs us of a canonical depiction of hell. But fear not, Crumb-Bums, because we'll eventually get a glimpse of one on the cover of Weirdo number 4 from 1982 in the filigreed border reminiscent of the covers of Mad and Humbug magazines, which we talked about in episode number 11, Ode to Harvey Kurtzman. It's a delightfully class-conscious depiction of hell, where the damned souls of the wealthy are buried in piles of useless cash, and one issue of Weirdo magazine, see if you can spot it, and force-fed filthy moolah by lusty Borgelian demons as their naughty bodies are partitioned and sold off for real estate development. Incidentally, I was being a little bit cheeky just now when I used the word Bruegelian, because this cover also features Crumb's modern tribute to a 16th century painting in Ghent of Christ carrying the cross by a follower of Hieronymus Bosch, which also relates thematically to Mr.Natural Repents. In the same issue of Weirdo, we get a more traditional, fiery depiction of hell, in the form of Crumb's worst LSD trip in I Remember the 60s. Now, I have a lot to say about this particular image, which is reoccurring throughout the canon. However, I think I'll save that for an LSD in the Crummy-verse episode at some point in the future, but I've got 2 more depictions of hell to share with you before we get back to our comic. This greeting card from the early 60s, which appears in black and white, way back in the Complete Crumb Volume 3, wow, we rarely bust that volume out, I think technically is the first canonical depiction of hell. The other one is a non-canonical illustration from 1988, which can be found in Odds and Ends titled Gina in Hell, who, in addition to being cast into the eternal flames, is forced to wear ugly shoes forever. I did some research and I think I know who Gina is, but she hasn't responded to my inquiry, so I'll keep it to myself for now. Returning to the comic, Mr.Natural mumbles and grumbles, bitter at his humiliation. He returns home and is surprised to find a portly, besuited, middle-aged businessman who says, "Howdy, Mr. Natural." Outraged, Natural shouts at the intruder, "What the hell are you doing sitting in my easy chair?" The man coolly responds, "Now take it easy, calm down, Natural boy. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Cheesis K. Reist. You've heard of me, no doubt," as he reaches over and shakes Mr. Natural's left hand. And indeed, the learned mystic has heard of Cheesis, a character already canonically established in the Crummy-verse. Now, I was also saving this character for another episode, but what the hell, it's only a shitload of more work to do it here, so why not? Incidentally, if you want my blood too, you can direct your emails to kyle@kylebridget.com. Cheesis had previously appeared in an East Village Other from October of 1967, featuring Edgar and Mary Jane Crumb. Cheesis, this time ending in an IS, takes over Edgar's TV, flipping the script and zapping him into oblivion, only for Edgar to become the god of all creation, forming the sun and the earth before manifesting as the Adamic first man, meeting Mary Jane, his Eve, and realizing that he's been dreaming in front of the TV the whole time. It ends with the couple deciding to watch Mr.Natural, who, canonically, had a TV show. For years I thought Cheesis K. Reist was a minced oath, sort of a cheat code for blasphemy, like saying Geez Louise or Jeebus or Gosh. And you know, maybe around the Crumb household growing up, cheeses had been a socially acceptable expletive. But after seeing this mock cover for a would-be dump truck comics, drawn in a sketchbook between March and June of 1966, in which, along with Mr. Spiff and the Big Galoot, the old pooperoo definitely would have appeared, and which seemingly would have served as the introduction of that rascally old charlatan, Cheesis K. Reist. I now suspect the name is just a phonetic rendition of the expletive. Like, if I somehow drop this giant coffee table art book on my foot, I might exclaim, "Whoops! Ah! Cheesis K. Reist! Ah!" The character also appeared in an earlier sketchbook version of Mr.Natural Repents, which again is so similar to the East Village Other version, albeit less good, that it's not worth diving into. The next canonical appearance of Cheesis, once again with the IS spelling, is Hamburger Hijinks, published in Zap number 2 and printed on the following page of the Complete Crumb Volume 5. But it's a reworking of a non-canonical comic called Cheesis K. Reist in the Detroit Avenue story, which is otherwise almost the exact same script as Hamburger Hijinks, only told in half the pages. It's reprinted in Odds and Ends, where it's listed as being originally published in Cleveland by the poet D.A. Levy in 1966. And after doing some research, no thanks to the Crumb Compendium, I still love you, I found the information I was looking for on Verdant Press's website. It was published in Poets at the Gate, Volume 1, Number 3, from April of 1966. This, quote, book, end quote, this is about as small press as you can get. 13 pages, single-sided, side-stapled, printed on a ditto machine, and unlike the version printed in Odds and Ends, the ink was a kind of purplish blue. Like I said, Crumb pretty much remade this comic word for word 2 years later as Hamburger Hijinks. It's even got the same number of panels. But I actually like the Detroit Avenue story a little bit better. You know, it's tighter, it's got more of that early Fritz style, so this is one of those rare cases where we're mostly going to look at the proto version instead of the canonical one. First of all, you gotta know that both versions of this comic have a sort of rhythmic bop to them, you dig? And this is just a heads up, I'm not going to be able to do that justice here, so I strongly recommend that you read it for yourself. It starts with Cheesis bopping his way into a greasy spoon and ordering up one of them delicious little scrumptious little hamburgers, which the jolly cook serves up hearty and hot and plump as you please. Cheesis gives the purty little thing the mustard and the ketchup, and the pair stop for a moment to admire this beauty in a winner. Reist tells the burger that it must die for him to live, but he assures it that there's no malice in his actions. Suddenly, the ketchup and mustard bottles come to life, and they sing a little song about how the burger knows the score. Then the hamburger joins in too, and they warn Cheesis that killing it is only half of the merry-go-round. Cheesis scarfs it down, laughing. Only he's not laughing when the condiments then inform him that it's now his turn to give himself up. Now it's Reist's turn to die. But he dismisses them with a "shut up" and smashes them to bits, exiting the diner angrily, saying, "Let me out of this creepy joint." Now, this is where the 1966 comic really begins to outshine the 68 version in my opinion, and I'll show you a couple of comparisons as we finish this one off. Cheesis walks the streets, casting a long, expressionistic shadow, which lends an atmosphere of heightened paranoia. He trips over 3 wizened old rummies sitting in a vacant storefront and lands on his face with a splat. They shout, "Watch out, bum! Asshole! You stinky piece of shit!" And they laugh at him as he humiliates himself further by replying, "My asshole does not stink. I don't have to."
And you, eating up the profits. Get back where you belong.
Oh, shut up! I don't have to.
You really get the sense that Reist is unraveling at the seams in his desperate attempt to escape his fate. And look how much harder he splats in the earlier Detroit Avenue story, and how much more deranged and disheveled he looks than in Hamburger Hijinks. In flipping off the old tramps, Cheesis walks blindly into the street, where he confronts his doom in a pair of large roaring trucks, one of which might just be old Uncle Uh-Oh and his garbage truck from Zap number 0. With a desperate gurgle and a choke, Reist is flattened in a dust cloud under a booming roar. The action here is not only filling the panels, its images and sounds are rippling and bursting out of frame. Compare that to the remake, which is more sparse and contained. The lines are clean and mechanical, whereas the 66 version is more lively, frenetic, and raw. The whole page feels like it's moving, as if the lines were gonna wriggle off the page into your hands. Or at least it would have felt that way had you actually been able to see them. Burnside Rare Books in Portland, Oregon, Go Bangers, has a set of all 4 issues of D.A. Levy's Poets at the Gate, including Volume 3 signed by Crumb, for the low price of just $2,500 American. And we can see what the abysmal print quality is like, although this copy may be from later in the run. Underground comics collector Max von Arx has a very crisp copy of just the comic, which he acquired from underground legend Kim Deitch. It only shows the impression of a single corner staple, so we know that it hasn't been removed from a copy of Poets at the Gate, which has 3 staples going down the side. And he was told by Deitch that it came from an edition of 50 copies. Ditto machines, spirit duplicators, mimeographs, these are all basically the same thing, and the way they worked was like this. You'd make your master on a special 2-ply form, similar to carbon paper. You'd draw or type on the top layer, then separate the duplicate layer, which was both the printing plate and the ink. So you could do a few dozen good copies before having diminishing returns, and only 200 to 300 copies maximum. They were coated with a solvent that transferred the ink onto the paper, leaving it smelling pleasingly like alcohol. But it also made the copies brittle, plus the dye fades when exposed to fluorescent lights or, God forbid, sunlight. So if you're planning on dropping a half a Madison on this set of Poets at the Gate, well, good luck archiving them. Since all of the work in Poets at the Gate Volume 3 comes from a reading that took place on April 29, 1966 at The Gate, a coffee house that was located in the basement of Trinity Cathedral in Cleveland, my theory is that Crumb attended the reading when he was briefly back in Cleveland between living in New York and running away to California. He likely would have had his sketchbook with him, and he either offered or was asked by Levy to draw something on the spot for Poets at the Gate Volume 3, which he did in exchange for the first 50 copies. That's why the pages in the issue are more faded than the rest of the book, while the version that appears in Odds and Ends was taken from one of the 50 copies that Crumb took off the top. But this is all very much apocryphal, so let's bring it back to Cheesis. Broken, emaciated, and thoroughly humbled, what's left of Reist crawls to the curb, where he's met by some old people and a couple of pinheads. An old man in a suit says, "You're saved, brother!" To which Cheesis replies, "No, I'm not. I'm dead." The subtext is that he's crossed over the road, and he's now in the afterlife. It's more clear in the 66 version, where the old lady's wheelchair is besigned with phrases like "salvation is at hand" and "God is love." In Hamburger Hijinks, the message is a little more subtle. Slumped in a vacant doorway, much like the drunken bums he tripped over earlier, he weeps for his wasted life, cursing the lousy, no-good, dirty, low-down hamburger what done it to him. Then he notices, back on the other side, a couple of chipper fellas trucking on down the line. Now, when Detroit Avenue's story was published, Keep On Truckin' was still just a non-canonical sketchbook drawing, and not yet the career-defining comic that it would become after the publication of Zap No. 1 in 1967, although it had already become an iconic meme by the publication of Hamburger Hijinks in 1968. And the panel in that one is a clear nod to Keep On Truckin'. The energy of the truckin' ethos rejuvenates Cheesis K. Reist as he realizes exactly what he needs: another hamburger. And the cosmic ballet goes on.
Does anyone want to switch seats?
This is probably the only panel where I really prefer the later version. It's just so emblematic of the short-lived innocence of Crumb's happy hippie comics phase. Both versions cast Cheesis in the role of the archetypical dying and rising god, a particular kind of mythological tale emerging from the cultures of the ancient Near East, where the heroic god figure dies and is resurrected. A lot of scholars like to nitpick this mythotype. You know, like, this one wasn't technically a god, he was more of a demigod, or a man even. And that one didn't really die, they just visited the underworld for a bit. And sure, yeah, they returned, but not bodily, and so on and so on. But let's be honest, the controversy exists because the dying and rising savior motif intuitively, and perhaps suspiciously, maps so well onto Jesus Christ. Getting all pedantic about how Christianity is unique from all of those hokey pagan religions has become something of a cottage industry. Regardless, it does seem to be a repeating theme in mythic literature, often an allegory for the agricultural year. Jesus sows his seeds, entering the diner and dressing the hamburger. Eating it symbolizes the bounty of the harvest, but it also foreshadows the coming winter, which is a metaphorical death. But he's resurrected to repeat the cycle, representing the renewal of spring. He's literally a Christ-like figure, and like his namesake, he brokers salvation on behalf of God, which is the role Cheesis plays in Mr.Natural Repents. Mr.Natural looks at him cockeyed and says, "What's your game, Reist?" He explains that he's taken a special interest in the case and is acting as a mediator of sorts. Exasperated, Mr.Natural lets out an "Oi," recognizing that the man upstairs isn't gonna let him off that easy. But Reist assures him, it's not all that bad, it's just a small matter of penance. The Natch offers an alternative approach. "Why don't you people just leave me alone?" But Cheesis replies, "You know and I know that is impossible, so I have here a few simple devices, I'll just leave these with you," handing him a briefcase marked Penance Kit number 5. Mr.Natural grouses, "You guys are real cute," which Cheesis ignores, saying 3 weeks of chastisement are all that's required, but more wouldn't hurt, as he doffs his fedora and exits the domicile. Mr.Natural stews with the case for a bit, but then proceeds to chastise himself, pushing a Sisyphean boulder up a mountain, while wearing a hair shirt, which is a deliberately uncomfortable shirt made from coarse, scratchy animal hair, and shackled to a heavy ball and chain. Heaven, Hell, and Repent, taken as a trilogy. I think it makes my list of top 10 Mr.Natural comics. Is a cosmic journey through the Christian collective consciousness, which definitely gets the better of Mr.Natural in the end, as ultimately he's forced to bend to powers beyond his control. But they never break him. He's defiant through the entire ordeal, consistently reinforcing just how corny and outdated the whole concept is. And it is corny, Crumb-Bums. I mean, this is a child's conception of heaven. A magic land in the clouds a la Care Bears, with a celestial chorus of angels, and God is always there with you, and He's your buddy. Come on, man. That's not how modern Christians tend to think of a literal heaven. If anything, they think it's a place where you're safe and vindicated in all your wacky beliefs, and nobody challenges you, and you do your favorite thing forever, but it feels better, like doing heroin, only you never come down. But that's corny too, and yeah, I know that's easy for me to say because I wasn't raised a Christian, and we're well over a decade past peak internet atheism. Back in 1968 though, over 90% of Americans identified as Christian, and less than 10% identified religion as not very important in their life. Robert's father, Charles Sr., was an atheist. He had been to war and had seen his friends die right in front of him. That had been a pretty f***ing strong demonstration of the finality of death. Nevertheless, he liked the discipline of Catholic school. He felt it was good for the kids, and he had seen nuns bravely risk their lives in the war, and he just thought nuns were the greatest. So the family dutifully attended Mass every Sunday, and despite their dysfunctionality, observed all the major holidays. In his youth, Robert was a devout Catholic. He was something of a Puritan even, and he couldn't fathom why anyone would choose to leave the one true church. Of course, he was scared of hell, but most of all, he was terrified of the nuns. He said his prayers every night before bed until he was 15 or 16, about 10 years before making the comics that we looked at today. Around that time, Robert and his brother Charles Jr. had what he called a religious phase, attending Sunday services at different churches, including a small black one, before ultimately splitting with the church altogether, which de facto led to the whole family splitting with it. In an interview with Jean-Pierre Mercier in 1999, Robert said, "We stopped going to church, and as soon as we dropped out, they all dropped out, the whole family. My parents, neither of them said anything about it, and neither of them ever went to church again." Though he doesn't seem to have ever gone full-blown atheist either. In the same interview he says, "I had a big mystic phase in the 60s, when I was taking LSD. I studied Eastern religions and philosophies, but I drifted more into social and political ideas in the early 70s. Mr.Natural meets God, gets the bum's rush, and repents would come right in the middle of that shift, and at an interesting moment for the hippie counterculture. The evangelical Jesus movement, offering a more hip Christian experience outside of stuffy old institutions, was heavily recruiting young Jesus freaks in the Bay Area at the time. Even Crumb's Zap contemporary, Rick Griffin, will become born again in 1970, about a year and a half after today's comics came out. And it's one thing to depict heaven and hell in cartoons. You know, that was everywhere and had been for many decades. But to come right out and say, "Nah, that's a bunch of baloney for dumb idiots and maroons," well, that's thumbing your nose at the vast majority of the country. So it's easy to miss how transgressive this comic was, and how personal it would have been to Robert at the time, as a lapsed Catholic surrounded by an emerging evangelical movement. Catholic guilt, man. They carry that trauma. And we see it again and again in his comics and in his sketchbooks from the 1960s through the 1980s. Around that time, he joined the Church of the Subgenius, a parody religion and something of a precursor to the modern, post-Levian Church of Satan, or to Pastafarianism, the atheistic church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster. Crumb became more spiritual after moving to France in 1991, which is when we begin to see frequent sketchbook appearances of characters like the Roman Dodo, who's mostly only known for appearing on the cover of that one issue of Raw. Then later, we'd get the remarkable Mystic Funny series at the turn of the century, especially those first 2 issues. So good. And eventually, his fascination with God and religion would lead to the most ambitious project of his entire career, the Book of Genesis. But we'll explore that and the rest of Crumb's spiritual journey at some point in the future. For now, it's time to end this God-forsaken episode. So if you like this program, please remember to hit like, hit subscribe, be a ding-dong daddy, and ding that bell. I've been your host, Kyle Bridget. You can find my links in the show description, and you can help support my work and all of the programs on this channel by signing up at Patreon, where you can get access to my uncensored videos, including this one. Or you can even just buy them there directly if you're not the joining type. But if you do join, you'll be thanked for eternity at the end of this program, which is now. Canonically Crumb will be back as weekly as possible with another deep dive into the Crummy-verse. Thanks again, Crumb-Bums, and keep it reet.
Always giving me the dick, telling me that life's always a wreck. But as long as I have fun with the devil says I. So afraid of foam and Satan, now why don't stop your hesitating? Gonna be a long time dead, so the devil says I. You can have your social teas and bingo for your fun, but the things I like to do, you stop me one by one. Even if it makes me stronger, it ain't gonna make me live no longer. Even if I do go wrong with the devil says I.